a Swiftie?
I would not say that I'm a Swiftie in terms of the level of obsession that I see the people that I know that are
You probably
Swifties.
have to reach a certain criteria to be called a Swiftie, as opposed to, I like Taylor Swift.
Yeah, I would say that as a consumer of pop music and pop culture, I am intrigued and fascinated by Taylor Swift and the phenomenon of Taylor Swift. Welcome to another episode of Harder to Breathe. I'm your host, Ryan Dusick. I was the founding drummer of Maroon 5, but I'm now a licensed therapist, author, and mental health advocate. With me, as always, is my co-host, Duck Maylard. Today, we're having another one-on-one conversation. How do you feel about that?
I'm excited. We finally have some questions. We've been asking our fans for the last year to write us some questions and stuff, and we finally got enough to do a whole mailbag episode. So we're like a real podcast now. I'm very excited.
We did do one episode before. It wasn't a full episode. It was just we at one point did a little thing where we answered
some little handwritten messages. So now we're into the 21st century with electronic mail.
Well, I like the idea of engaging with our fans
Me
more,
too.
and I like the idea that the content that we create is going to be more aligned with what people want to hear us talk about. Because sometimes we have things we want to talk about or things that we perceive to be important to the public discourse, but then, we're just two people and
We're just as God made us, sir.
we're not exactly always connected to the pulse
That's
of the
true.
common culture. I try to be, you get a little older and you think you're not going to be one of those guys that it gets totally disconnected from the mainstream and like what the kids are listening to.
But look at me, I'm in shorts like a kid.
Yeah,
Very much.
super cool, man.
Super cool. It's funny. I used to say that, like, that's how you know if someone is an adult. If it's hot enough to wear shorts and they're wearing pants, then they're a grown-up man. So I was like, I always maintained, I'm gonna wear shorts until the last, like, I was always that guy in high school that was like, it's only 53 degrees, I'm still wearing shorts. So I'm back to it.
Well, I've come full circle on the whole shorts thing because I don't know, somewhere along the line, I think when I was a teenager, maybe as a very young adult, I got the idea in my mind from something that someone said that people that wear shorts are dorks. Maybe it was because I was, I don't know, living in LA. I don't know. But I didn't wear shorts other than like if I was literally playing basketball or in swim trunks.
Right.
It was always jeans or some other kind of pants, even when it was hot out.
Yeah.
For years, for the longest time. Up until like maybe 5 years ago, I would say, a man is not supposed to wear shorts.
No, a kid is.
But now I'm like, geez, I live on the surface of the sun here on the West Valley, and it's when it's 100 degrees out,
You gotta wear some shorts.
gotta wear some shorts, especially now that I got my laid back pool vibe.
Plus, I think my legs are my best feature, so I really had to show them off.
I don't disagree with you.
Although I have lost all the hair on my legs like an old man. I don't know what's going on there.
Well, that's because of the socks.
Yeah, but that's why I started wearing lower socks. This is fascinating conversation. Anyway.
Well, these are the things that occur as you get older.
It's true.
It pertains to the earlier conversation.
It's true.
So should we jump into fan
I'd love to.
questions?
I printed them out analog style because, like I said, it's too confusing for us old men to figure out. So let's jump right into it. Our first question comes from Aaron in Annapolis, Maryland. There's a location. Hey, Ryan and Duck, I just dropped my son off at college last week, and it was more emotional than I was expecting. I didn't think I'd end up being a cliche of a bereft empty nester, but I'm having a hard time going about my daily routines without my child being a part of it. I don't want to be clingy and call them too much to check, but I'm having a hard time navigating the loneliness. This is something I actually really relate to. My sister just dropped her only child off at college yesterday.
Oh, wow.
And we were FaceTiming, and I was it was my alma mater. They're going to my alma mater, and so I got to see the dorm rooms, But they're going through the same thing. My sister is, surprisingly was like, I thought it'd be easier, but nope, the waterworks came and stuff. So I definitely relate to this.
Then what does it bring up for you when you hear that, though? Because you have a kid that's not to that age yet, but I mean...
It made me start to think about it. I've got a few more years before he starts to head off to school. But, the right now it sounds, that'd be nice to have the house to ourselves and this. But I know the second that I walk out the door of that dorm room, it's going to hit me the same way. I'll be like, wait a minute. He's staying here. I'm leaving my little boy.
Well, educate me. I mean, I'm the therapist, but you're the one with a kid. Mm-hmm. So I'm curious, what emotions that brings up, because I know people obviously are very attached to their children in a primal way. You know, it's protective, it's loving. For some people, it's, you know, there's other layers to it than that. And also I think for any of us, anything that becomes your entire identity in life, it's another one of those situations in life of transition where the thing that has been such a central part of your existence changes or now is not so present in your life. And that can be really hard just personally for your identity. I don't want to put words in your mouth.
No,
what comes up
I
for
agree
you?
because I think about in Southern California, we have the travel baseball culture, which is we're not big into baseball, but we're enough connected to it that I see the other parents who are like, every weekend we drive to Phoenix or we drive to Lancaster. It's like their whole lives are wrapped up in youth sports. And it's like they spend 18 years completely at the mercy of their kids, you know, sports schedules and life, which is great. I mean, and to think the second they drop them off at college that's suddenly gone. And like you say, so much of their identity is tied up in that. It's got to be, it's not just a difficult transition. It's like, imagine trying to become a new person at 50.
Right.
You know, and it sounds like Aaron is going through something like that. For me, I think I've always been a person who looks forward, sometimes to my own detriment, in that, like, I think we talked about it where I was like, when my son was born, I was like, oh, I just can't wait for him to start crawling. Right. Oh, I can't wait for him to start talking. Oh, when can he go to school? So it's like, so I think I'm always excited about his next developmental level, but I think there might be a finish line there if he goes off to school, and that's it. Like, there's no next level for me other than him, like, moving into his own place, having his own career, meeting his own spouse, having his own kids. So that might be the start of the end for me, and it might bring up some emotional things for me.
So is it worry that you're not going to be as relevant for him, that you've been sort of his protector, his, you know, source of guidance and education and love and support, and he's going to have his own life and you're not going to have the same kind of importance or relevance in his life? I mean, what, in terms of the change, other than just your own experience of having a child in your home and that changing, is it a loss of importance in some way? I'm
sure. For me, I feel like I'm not really a micromanager, but my wife would admit that she likes to kind of make sure everything is where it's supposed to be. And I think part of having a kid is being like, well, I want to prepare you for this situation and I want to make sure you're this. And when they go off to school, it's like, ready or not, he's off. And so I think there's the fear that, you know, maybe we haven't prepared him enough, or that I can't make any more micro adjustments because he's off in the world. So you're like, it's out of your hands. It's a loss of control.
Oh, yes. But is it, so then it's more also just worry that you want to make sure that he's okay, and you have less control over that.
And I think you have to, I mean, we've set up this arbitrary age of 18 as like, all right, well, this is when it's now shifted completely to you. And so I would imagine that Aaron's going through that feeling of like, I don't have anyone to worry about anymore. I don't have any power over someone saying, that's not a good decision. Let's maybe, you know, carry that better or whatever. And so, you know, that's got to be a weird feeling to have been 100% invested in someone else's well-being for 18 years. Yeah. And now suddenly all you got to worry about is yourself.
Yeah, I've heard, you know, a lot of people that have kids, and it makes me really curious because for the longest time, I haven't even thought about having kids. But people say that when you have kids, you know, your entire life perspective changes. You know, you go from basically being me-centric and everything's about how do I feel, what's going to, you know, fulfill my needs, to all of a sudden there's something in the world that's more important than that. Yeah. And it becomes hopefully the center of your world for some people that are really self-obsessed.
As we've talked about on this show many times.
Yeah, there are those parents that are what we'd call narcissistic parents, that have a hard time prioritizing their children's needs over their own. But even just biologically, I think 90% of people feel that shift when they have a child in the world that is theirs. There's a protective instinct. There's the feeling that, well, their well-being is even more important than mine. And so that's a really dynamic shift in terms of your worldview and how you go about living your life. And everything you're doing at the end of the day is about that child or children and their well-being. And so you carry that for 18 years, and then all of a sudden you're supposed to just let go of that and be like, well, I hope that I prepared them. And now we're just going to figure out how to live our lives as if we haven't been doing that for 2 decades. And I think the other thing that comes up too, that I see a lot with because I worked with a lot of middle-aged parents when I was working at the clinic, and some of them were there for their own reasons, some of them because they had kids that were struggling. And, relationships with teenagers are complicated because teenagers are complicated. And I think it's a very common thing that I saw where parents, they feel worried about their kids because, a teenager oftentimes doesn't open up to them. They don't talk to you the way that they used to when they were younger. It's a healthy, normal thing to rebel and sort of create your own space and figure out who you are separate from your parents. But there's this angst as a parent that comes up where you're like, I'm losing them. I don't even understand them anymore. I don't know what's going on inside of their head. And then it comes out as contentiousness, and you have a lot of conflict with your children at that age too. And so the analogy that I would try to give to the parent in that context is, up until a certain age around adolescence, you're walking along holding your child's hand, and there is basically no disconnection between you other than when they go off into a sleepover, summer camp or whatever. You're holding their hand through life. And then all of a sudden at a certain point, you notice they've taken their hand away and they're like, I can do this myself. And you're supposed to just be like, yeah, okay. Yeah, I trust that that's okay. But as you enter the teenage years, 14, 15, 16, not only do you separate like this, but like a wall comes up between you. And you can still hear them on the other side of the wall and they can still hear you. But you don't know if they're really listening to what you're saying. You can't see that they're digesting whatever. And at a certain point, the wall is so big, you can't even really hear them. And all you can do is kind of throw like letters over the top of the wall and hope that they're getting it, because you give them any kind of advice and they reject it outright immediately. And the end of that story is eventually, whether it's at 18 or 22 or 25 or 35, that wall ends and you kind of see each other again. And then a lot of the time you realize at some point as a parent that like they were listening. They did get those.
They're holding
letters.
all those letters in a big bunch in their arms. Yeah.
Yeah. And even though they went through that normal phase of having to separate and put up that wall, they still valued what you had to offer and say. But I imagine that that's the ultimate that's when the wall is biggest, is when they actually go out into the world.
Yeah.
And you're now left alone. They're not even in your home anymore. There was a figurative wall for a while, and then it becomes a literal wall or just separation where you can't see them physically anymore. And so I think that's when it's hardest to remember or to believe that they're going to go out in the world. They're going to go find themselves. They're going to have an experience, whether it's at college or whatever else. And eventually they're going to come back around at age 22 or 25 or 35.
Yeah.
And they're going to say, I want to reestablish my relationship with my parents. If you've been a good parent, that'll probably happen. If you haven't, sometimes it doesn't.
Yeah.
But you just have to kind of trust that. So I imagine it's like how people describe being parents. It's like your heart is literally outside of your body.
Yeah.
And you just have to go through the rest of your life like that.
My advice, my amateur advice, is twofold. One, that thing that you said about how, your whole life has been about you, and then suddenly you have a kid and you're expected to sort of give 100% of yourself over. I've always been cognizant of holding a little bit of myself back, not in a selfish way, but just I know this is important. In the same way the fix your own oxygen mask before you affix your kids metaphor. I've always maintained that it's important for me to maintain my own personal happiness and my own identity apart from being a father, because I knew that I wouldn't ever want to have resentment or pushback of like, all I am is a dad. So it was very important to me to carve out a little piece of myself.
Yeah.
And so firstly, I would say lean into those things that made you who you were while you had a kid, before you had a kid, and maybe rediscover some of those things, whether it's a hobby, whether it's friends you sort of lost touch with because, when we have kids, we all sort of go our separate ways. But then the flip side of it is also, you're saying you don't want to bother your kid and be clingy.
Yeah.
I would say let them dictate the contact and how much they need you, especially that first year. I was just talking about it with my sister. Like that first 3-month stretch from you drop your kid off in August till Thanksgiving is probably the first time that you've been away from your kid and they've been away from you for 3 months. So that's probably going to be a real trial period for them to be like, is it okay if I call my mom, call my dad this weekend? Maybe I'll come home, and I think you may be surprised that they are experiencing a lot of the same separation anxiety that you are. And so I would let them sort of, at least in the beginning, dictate the terms of your agreement and how often you talk and things like that. I think you'll find a kind of natural balance over the first year.
Yeah, I think the likelihood, being that age, being still a teenager, the more your parents try to hold on, the more you're going to reject it.
Exactly.
If you have a parent who's kind of well-intentioned but on the edge of smothering, like, you're going to push away that much more at that age, and maybe not reject it as much later. But I think it is wise advice to say, let them be the one to come to you, because they will.
Yeah.
If they feel, at that age, you reject the thing that was given to you in terms of the protectiveness of your parent, because you need to figure out how to stand on your own 2 feet. But once you're out in that world and you're trying to do things for yourself, and you realize, like, I don't know how to do this. Right. Like, you're going to be thinking, mommy, on some level, you know what I mean? Even if you're not thinking that literally. And there will come a time when you say to yourself at that age, like, I need help. Yeah. And then that's when you reach out, and then as a parent, you're like, oh, they still need me.
They still need me. Exactly. So
I think that is good advice. I mean, obviously within reason. You don't want to completely turn a cold shoulder, like, oh, you're out of my life.
It's been a year. I haven't heard from them. Yeah.
Well, I think the other important thing, other than that advice, which is a good piece of advice, is that, there are certain transitions in life that are normal transitions in life, and then there are certain transitions that are not predictable ones, and those ones obviously are really painful and scary. But like coming of age, adolescence, that's a big transition where you have to adapt. Everyone goes through it. At a certain point, leaving home is a transition that every person, most people go through. Right. And empty, the stages of like middle age and aging, like, those are all predictable transitions that we go through. And if you have kids, sooner or later, you're going to go through that empty nest transition. And so we talk about having compassion for self, understanding, like, what's coming up for you is very normal. You're not being too needy. You're not being, whatever emotions are coming up is a part of this confusing process that everyone that goes through this goes through. Yeah. Right. And so allowing yourself to have the time and the grace to experience sadness, or a feeling of loss, or a feeling of loss of control, or a longing for another time in your life, or feeling a loss of identity. Like, I don't even know who I am anymore. It's almost like a grieving process. When you go through a life transition, you have to grieve the old life and learn to welcome the new life. And eventually, hopefully, the ideal place to be in is one of gratitude and one of recognizing that this is a challenging change, but every challenge is an opportunity. Yeah. And like you said, you can use this time to rediscover things about yourself, or discover new passions and things, and take on new adventures. So there's always a pro to every con. And if you look at it that way, then even though it's difficult, there's going to be a silver lining, I think.
So, Aaron, I hope that helps. That seems like good advice.
Thank you, Aaron.
Let's move on to our next question. This one is, believe it or not, this is an international question.
Oh, okay.
This is short but sweet, but this is from, I'm going to try, Amandine in France.
Oh.
In Lyon, France. It's for you. What's your advice for a beginner on the drums? Very straightforward.
Okay.
What would you tell a beginner to focus on?
Well, I don't know if I'm the best person to give advice on drumming.
You're still a great drummer.
Well,
so
thank you.
You still have that. It's in there.
I think it's a combination of things that I did right and things that I did wrong are the reason for the advice that I would give. In terms of things that I did wrong first, I would say it's very helpful to do certain things the prescribed way, to learn proper technique, how to hold a stick, how to do things in an efficient way, ergonomics, how you sit at your drums, how you set up your drums. If you do those things early on, it's going to set you up for success, because you're going to be conditioned from the beginning to do things in a healthy way. I skipped over that whole process. I went right to, I just want to bash like the people on Headbangers Ball. And I sat really low and had my cymbals way up high, and I played with a lot of flailing.
Were they hanging from chains?
Like
the Queensryche video?
Of course. Well, when I was 12 years old and I started playing the drums, you'd go into Guitar Center and they had those huge double rack things where you had drums and then you had cymbals.
rototoms all the way around.
You had the Slaughter thing with 2 kick drums behind you that said "Stick it to ya."
We should get that for the studio.
So that's cool, but like, you know that episode, you know that Freaks and Geeks guy, you like that, you know, there's the Siegel.
Jason
Segel, you know, he's really into Rush, and like before he's even learned to play the drums, he's got 18 pieces. He's got drums and cymbals. I was that kid. I laughed so hard when I saw that, because I just kept asking my parents, can I get another tom? Can I get rototoms?
Yeah.
Can I get splash cymbals and China cymbals?
Remote hat over here.
Yeah. And I'd been playing for like 6 months, and it was like, I hadn't earned that yet, and also it can be a bit of a distraction, you know, from the most fundamental and most important part of drumming, which is learning how to groove, right? It's not to say that that's not fun and exciting. And I would, the other piece of advice that comes from what I did right is having a spirit of adventure, having a spirit of, this is my passion, I'm going to let it take me wherever it goes, being creative with it, finding your own way of doing it.
Yeah.
And don't just do everything completely by the book, the way that it's prescribed. The best creative people, I think, you know, you start from an education of the quote unquote right way of doing something, and then you find your own way of doing it. It's that age old thing of, you learn the rules so you can break them.
Yeah.
Right. And Picasso had to be trained in you know, the classics before he could invent his own unique style. And I think that if you can combine those two things, then you could have the chance to be really great, and have the skill sets that's required to be fundamentally sound, but then also be really expressive and do something unique. But I think, you know, if all of that other stuff is becoming a distraction from being able to just play really consistently and play a good groove, that, I mean, any session drummer I've ever known in my life would tell you, all the chops in the world are not going to get you the gig.
Right.
It's playing in the pocket that's going to get you the gig. Unless you're playing with some jazz fusion ensemble and you have to play
busier
crazy.
the better. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, but that's not the paying gig. The normal paying gig is the pop record, or the, you know, the smooth jazz record, or whatever, where you're playing groove. And so that's going to serve you most. That's the most important thing. And it also is, you know, 99% of people that listen to music, they like to hear a beat and a melody, right? And so whatever kind of music you like, even if you are playing crazy jazz fusion with fills and all kinds of intricate time signatures and stuff, if you can groove doing that, you're going to be head and shoulders above the rest. So yeah, I think it's a combo. It's a combo of the fundamentals and the expressiveness.
It's funny that you say, you know, the big drum. I grew up a Rush fan, as you know, and so same thing. Any drum kit that I saw that didn't have two drum, you know, kick drums, and I was like, well, what's this dinky little thing? But then you see that the guys who are out on the 3rd Street Promenade playing a kick drum, a snare, and a hi-hat, and you're like, that guy's killing it.
Yeah.
And he's got 3 pieces, you know? And I always equate it to the same, like, as a guitar player now, you know, I grew up loving, like, flashy metal guitars and stuff. And then you see guys who play a telly, and you're like, telly's so boring and lame. And then you're like, yeah, but, like, listen to that. You know, look at the guys who play tellies, and they're like, it's just all feel, and it's, you know what I mean? It's you know, Keith Richards. It isn't about the gear, and it isn't about the flash. It's about the feel, and about, you know, and as a bass player, I would recommend listen to your bass player, listen to your band, you know. As a drummer, kind of figure out what serves the song rather than serves you showing off your chops, things like that. And I would also recommend get a minivan, because you're going to have to move your gear, and get a good friend who's willing to be your roadie. So those are my pieces of advice.
Yeah, wear a back brace.
Yeah, exactly.
If I want to give the fatherly advice, you know, you definitely wreck your body. And lugging drums around is definitely a very physical, athletic endeavor. And I'm glad that I did that when I was young. I mean, if I was loading drums in and out of clubs upstairs and stuff now, I'd be in a lot of trouble.
But you're always going to have a band. People always need drummers. So, you know, it's like guitar players are a dime a dozen, but drummers and bass players, high demand.
Sure,
so
for sure.
A good choice.
Great question. Thank you for that question.
Yeah. Bonjour.
Mon Dieu. Is that what you said?
Mon Dieu. Tout alors. All right. This next one comes from Instagram. This is from Kira. Hey guys, wanted to get your take on adult friendships. As I've gotten older over the years, so many folks that were once close friends, I find myself growing apart from for different reasons, whether it's couples getting divorced and we lose friends that way, or people just raise their kids differently, like they actively aren't parenting, and I find myself judging them and not wanting to hang out. My children have friends, and it's rare that I actually like the parents, but I try to make small talk since it's so hard to meet cool new people in one's 40s. Any tips? Did my wife write this? Because that's our experience a lot.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah. You sort of, when your kid has a friend, you hope that their parents are cool, and for the most part, they usually are, and you're like, yeah, but they're not like, if I had the choice, I wouldn't have chosen these people. You know? I'm subtweeting all of my kids' friends, so I'm not talking about you guys. You guys are awesome, but it's like you're sort of forced together, and you just sort of hope that you can. It's like having neighbors. Sometimes you get really lucky, and your neighbor is the coolest person in the world.
Sure.
But most of the time, you just kind of hope that you don't fight and that you get along.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's tough to find that perfect combination of their kids are cool and our kids like each other and we love them too and we're all best friends. It's difficult. We've talked about making friends as adults. It's tough.
It is. I hear this a lot, but I don't think it's just an adult thing. I mean like a middle-aged thing.
Mm-hmm.
I had clients at the clinic that were in their 20s that once you're not in school anymore and you're not like forced together with a lot of people your age that are going through the same experience. Once you're just out in the world at any stage of life, I think it's difficult. You have to make a conscious effort to go out there and put yourself in positions where you're going to meet people. You have to prioritize making new friends because it doesn't just come to you. It doesn't just land in your lap. I think if you are a parent, that is another scenario in which people are brought into your life because your kids are going to have parents, and those are going to be people in your age group that you're going to meet. So that can be a social aspect. I think that for me, actually, it was the reverse because I was in a relationship for a long time. We didn't have kids. And a lot of the people that we were friends with when we were younger, as we started getting older, started getting married and having kids. And so the nature of those relationships changed.
Yeah.
Their priorities are different. The conversations are different. I remember Sean and I, sometimes we'd go and to a party or something, people we'd known for a long time. And we're like, I don't know what to talk to these people about because all they talk about is their kids.
Yeah.
And we're like, well, it's not the same as it was. And that's just kind of the nature of life too. I mean, people grow apart, they have different interests and they grow in different directions, but it does become more challenging for people that don't have kids because the majority of people at a certain point do have kids. And so who are your friends then, other than the few people that you in your group?
These weird outliers like, we didn't have children.
Well, I thankfully do have a few friends that we sort of half jokingly referred to as the non-breeders club.
Okay.
And I'm grateful for those friends, but even old friends, it gets harder to stay connected to them. That's part of the reason why I wanted to redo my yard and have more parties and stuff. It's like you need excuses. You need to make that effort to make sure that you maintain those connections. And it's not going to be ever again like it was when you lived in college across the hall from someone and you see them every day. Mm-hmm. It's going to be at best you see them once a month.
That's a really good point. Sorry to interrupt, but like that we think of these friends are just the perfect combination, but it's like a lot of it's experiential and environmental. You see them every day at school. You see people every day at a 9-to-5 job. Where I don't have that. So, a lot of those relationships just come by repetition and you sort of, you submit over time or just, well, I guess this is my best friend.
Yeah. Well, also I think shared experience is a big, important part of friendship. I look back at all of the great relationships I've had in my life. In particular, the male ones, it's been people that I met in sports, in school, or in music. Yeah. Really. I mean, if you think about it, like that's where you really, and those were all things I did when I was young. I have made a lot of friends since I went back to school to become a therapist. Yeah. The large majority of them have been women because 90% of therapists are women.
Is that true?
That's the stat that I heard. I don't know if it's entirely accurate or if somebody just pulled that number out of their butt. But,
sounds good.
Yeah, no, but it's at this point in my life, it makes sense. But there's a whole interesting dynamic to that too. That can be complicated because that's the age-old when Harry met Sally question about men and women and friendships. And I suppose that's even more complicated when you're married. You have a friend who is of the opposite sex and there's jealousy that comes with that.
Right.
So there's so many dynamics that come into why, as you get into a certain phase of life, it can be harder to establish or maintain relationships other than the ones that you've really made a commitment to, like your partner, your family. or people that you have like us. We've made a commitment to this thing.
Right.
We see each other regularly because we do that. And we've jokingly said, but I think it's true. Like if you're a middle-aged guy and you're finding like you have a disconnect with your old male friends, like start a podcast.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Because it is a good excuse to like get together and shoot the shit. And actually we've probably had more intense, more in-depth conversations about our feelings and stuff than we ever did before we started the podcast.
Absolutely. One of the things that really stood out in that question was the part where he says, people who raise their kids differently.
Yeah.
That's a real unique situation that people who aren't parents don't really experience. People that you've known your whole lives, suddenly you see the way they parent or don't parent, and you're like, I can't believe this guy that I've known my whole life would let his kid do that, or would not discipline his child that way. And it's actually a bad influence on my kid. And so maybe we can't hang out. Like, it's a real like gut punch of people showing their true colors or something. I don't want to sound too judgy, much like the question asker, but it's a real thing where you go, I love these people, but man, their parenting choices are so different from mine. Whether it's co-sleeping, which was like a big weird thing when we had a baby. Some people let their kids sleep with them until they don't want to anymore, and sometimes that goes until they're 10 years old. And for Jessica and I, that was such a foreign concept, And so there's a lot of examples of that where you go, is this just me being closed-minded and not being kind of open, or is this me being too judgy and things like that? It's a really delicate balance to walk, and especially as you get older and you do feel your friend group getting smaller and smaller, you don't want to push people out for dumb reasons, things that don't really affect the friendship, but it happens, And I don't know what advice I would give to that. I mean, I would say be more open-minded and just kind of roll with it, because the friendship is more important than your opinion on what food they give their kids, or they only eat organic or whatever,
I think it's a matter of degree, because I think that's the thing that comes up most. What you're touching on is more permissive parenting versus more authoritarian parenting. And I've seen that a lot, even in my own experience. I don't know if I've told this story on the show before, but I'll repeat it if I have. When I was like a kid, like my parents weren't super health nuts, but for the 80s, they were relatively health conscious. And in those days, health conscious meant something a little bit different than it does now. It was like they had fat-free Entenmann's. But we also just we didn't have, high sugar cereals. We had Wheaties and Cheerios and stuff like that.
Grape nuts.
Yeah, we had grape nuts.
Cracked a lot of teeth on those things.
Yeah.
Anyway.
And so I would say that my parents, they weren't strict, but they just, they were protective, and that was one way in which they were protective of our health, right? I remember one time when I went over to my friend Travis's house, and I always used to love sleeping over my friend Travis's house. And the next day, Travis's mom calls my mom and says, "Are you feeding your son?" And my mom is like, "What are you talking about?" And she's like, "Well, every time Ryan comes over here, he eats like 5 bowls of cereal in the morning."
It's blueberry.
and she's like, "That's weird. He doesn't do that." Wait, what kind of cereal do you have in your house? And she's like, the stuff that everyone has, Fruit Loops, Cocoa Krispies. And, and she's like, okay, well, that makes sense. And so, I mean, look, that could either prove or disprove the idea that you need to be mindful of the people that you're allowing, your kid to be parented by to some extent when they go sleep over there. Because yes, their choices might be very different from yours, but at the same time, it's like, maybe that's an experience I needed to have to go out into the world and be exposed to something, the way that other people live. And go and have a bunch of sugar and feel sick, and come home and be like, yeah, maybe I'm going to crave that. Maybe I'm going to go through a phase, or maybe I'm not. But we get so, we grow up one way, and we think that's the only way that people live. And then you get older. I think it's good to have experiences where you're exposed to other ways of living.
I think of it that way. Anytime my kid is like at another friend's house, or at they go out to dinner or something, and I go, oh, what did he have? And like, it was really weird. He ordered the lobster thermidor. And I'm like, well, I'd never get that for him, but sure. Like, I'm happy he's had the opportunity to have that experience with another family who would be willing. Lobster's a joke, but you know what I mean? Like, they might make something for him that I would never make, and maybe he like it, or maybe he learns he doesn't, and I didn't have to spend the money to find out, or whatever. You know what I mean? But I do. I there isn't a single part of me that's like, now when he goes to your house, he can't have sugar, he can't have that. Like, no, have that experience. I trust my son enough to make a smart choice. He's not going to be like, I'll eat 9 of those, you know. So I think of it the way you do, that it's a good experience to sort of, even if it feels like he's getting away with something, I'm happy to let him have that feeling.
Right.
Like, ooh, when I went to my friend's house, we got to do this, and we never do this in my house. And that's a fun little secret to have, even though I'm aware of it, because his parents texted me, like, they had 2 bowls of ice cream. I'm like, whatever, it's cool. You know what I mean?
One night of indulgence is not going to wreck them. You know, it's just an experience.
And it's a great memory and stuff. So, yeah. So that's a tough question. You know, I would say, especially on the parenting side, you know, do the things that you and I talked about. Be a little bit more like, I would say, chill out and let your kids have different experiences, and don't judge other parents too harshly for that. As far as making other friends, I think Ryan's right. Like, it's about the experiences and the environments you put yourself in. Yeah. So maybe if there's something you've always wanted to do, whether it's a hobby that you want to pick up, or remember not Groupon. What was there was like an activity one in the early 2000s where you could just, I went curling once. A friend of mine got a curling, and we went up to this ice rink somewhere in Van Nuys, and I did curling for the night and met a bunch of nice people. It was a great example of something I would have never done before. And I met a whole new group of people, and we're still friends to this day. No, that's not true. But still.
I couldn't tell you how many times. It's funny, you think of like a high level outpatient clinic where you're doing partial hospitalization and people dealing with psychosis and trauma and all of this stuff, that the kind of therapy you're doing is really intense, crazy trauma therapy. But a lot of times it was like behavioral change. Like, so what are your interests? And it's like, well, I really like chess. It's like, maybe you should join a chess club, you know? Yeah. And it's like, you're going to have experiences there. You might make a friend, you might not, but it's going to get you out into the world. And, you know, we play softball. That's a way. I don't know if the friends that I make there are people that are going to become my best friends necessarily, but I see them every weekend, and they become a part of the fabric of my life. And
the rich tapestry.
Yeah. And so you just kind of figure out those things that make you happy, and what your real interests are. And then sometimes just discover new interests, you know, and when you're 45 or 50 years old and you're an empty nester.
Right, I was gonna say, maybe you reach out to Aaron in Annapolis, Maryland, and you guys can be friends.
They take up rock climbing, and then you find somebody who has a similar interest, and there you go.
All right, on to our next question. This is from ST. I don't know, just through our email. We've only got an email at hardertobreathepodcast@gmail.com. If you have questions, if maybe these questions kind of light a fire under you to get involved, send us an email there. So from ST. They write, I'm reaching out because I'm looking for some insight about how to deal with parental estrangement. I've never been close with my father, as he's actively made a lot of bad choices in his life. Affairs, spending money that the family didn't have, and leaving my mom to clean up the mess. Sounds familiar. I feel like the relationship I have with him now as an adult is tenuous at best. My gut is telling me to just cut ties completely for my own mental health. But there's a small part of me that's worried that it's a selfish decision, because technically I'd be denying him a relationship with his granddaughter. Not that I think that he's a particularly involved or dedicated grandparent. Should I just trust my gut and cut ties completely, or is keeping some semblance of a relationship, even if it feels forced or performative on my end, better, so I'm not depriving my child of a grandparent? That's a tough one. We've talked about that a little bit on the show.
Yeah, that's a really tough one. And I always hesitate with something like that to give a broad strokes take or advice on it.
We said that on a previous episode, that you're never going to be like, leave him, or, you know.
Yeah, every case is different. And I've had clients that essentially decided, well, this is not a healthy relationship. It's not great, but I've weighed the pros and cons. And with everything in consideration, it's better to have this person in my life than not. And then it's just really a shift of mindset and perspective in terms of like, well, what role does this serve? Where are the boundaries? How do I have to take care of myself in the process? And What are my expectations? Because if you're expecting someone to be something they're not, and you're just always getting disappointed, you're just going to have to adjust those expectations to be consistent with what they're capable of giving. So there's a lot of factors that go into making that decision, and then how do you deal with that decision? What are the steps that need to be enacted to make it a healthy choice for you and lifestyle? And then there are those times when you do that pros and cons, and you wait and you say, this is more negative. And even if it's depriving them of something, or it feels cruel or whatever, like, my child is not going to benefit from me being more unhappy. And I have to make that choice. So I can't, without, obviously spending more time with this person and getting more context, give specific advice on that. But I think I would recommend talking it through with some kind of counselor, somebody who understands these dynamics, and really making a really informed decision, informed by self-awareness, by acceptance of reality, and not idealism.
That your dad is probably who he is and he's not going to change. So can you accept that? And,
because I think that's all relationships, right? Like, sooner or later you are confronted with the reality of, like, this is who this person is, and you decide, like, I love them and I forgive their faults and I hope that they work on themselves, but either way, I love them. Or you decide, this person has faults that I can't expect them to change. And if I accept that reality, that means I probably need to move on, because I'm always going to be disappointed by this person. So it's getting really real with yourself and having that conversation. It's not a clear cut, black and white kind of decision. There's a lot of, every relationship is nuanced and complicated.
Right.
And I think there's a trend these days where people are talking a lot about just cutting out their toxic parents. And I mean, if you cut every parent out of lives that didn't do everything perfectly and had their own problems, then no parent would ever survive that cut. You know what I mean? Because no parent is perfect and no person is perfect. So it's a matter of degree. But if you're really struggling and suffering as a result of somebody in your life, parent or otherwise, and it's making your life worse, and therefore potentially your child's life worse, then that's pretty clear cut. One of those factors that you talk about, is the grandchild, and that's one of those things that it's obviously case by case, but it's funny that kids have factored in all of these answers to all these questions. But, one of the things that my wife and I always made a conscious choice to do is, when my son was ready to be spoken to about things honestly and without a lot of sugarcoating, we would do it. So, his grandmother passed away when he was relatively young. We didn't shield him from it. We talked about death. We had to, and it was sort of one of those things that we can gloss over it, or we can make him have a real understanding, and it can still be kind of soft pedaled around. He's a young kid, but he understood it, and he understood the sort of bigger picture of Granny's not here anymore, but we still love her, and we still say goodnight to her every night in bed, like we send kisses up, and things like that. And so one of the factors that you would have to weigh in that situation would be your child's relationship with grandpa. And if they're like, I had a grandmother that my mother's mother, who wasn't the best mother to my mother, we've already talked about, and she wasn't the greatest grandmother to me, but it was just sort of like, well, she's my grandma, so that wasn't going to change. And whether she was there or whether she wasn't, I didn't care. I didn't feel the weight of the estrangement. You know what I mean? They're just a kid, so you'll accept kind of whatever the reality is. So if your child is accepting of the relationship in its current form, and you've weighed the pros and cons, then maybe it's just easier to keep everybody there for the sake of your kid. But if your kid has a really strong bond or connection with grandpa, and it's really important to them, then it might be worth it for you to swallow a little bit of your own. I don't want to tell people to, like, put your own needs and things aside after I just got done saying, don't give up your individuality. But yeah, like you say, it's balancing, it's weighing that list of pros and cons. And if it's important when your grandchild or when your child is old enough to understand, hey, grandpa made some bad choices that I don't agree with. Your relationship with him is your relationship, and that's cool. But understand why he and I aren't as close as you might think we should be. Yeah, that's what I was going to add to that. I think, look, boundaries are really important, clear boundaries. And I can imagine scenarios in which, you weigh, is having my parent in my life good for me or not? But then also separately, is it good for my child? And I can imagine a scenario in which you say, well, I think I don't want to deprive my child of that. And I think that essentially this is a good thing for them. I just know I can't handle having a relationship with this person.
Yeah.
So, you have clear boundaries. You say, look, I'm going to drop my kid off with you once a month and you're going to spend the weekend with them. I'm not going to deprive you of that or deprive him or her of that. But that's all I can do. I can't be a part of it. If you're comfortable with that, I mean, and that's your boundary, then that could work. As long as, you're, again, being realistic. It's like, is this ultimately a safe and good thing for the child?
Yeah.
And assessing your own needs in that situation, how that fits into it. As long as the boundaries are clear and you can work out a situation that works for everybody. It's every situation is different. Every relationship is different.
Yeah.
It's interesting how some of these different questions are kind of overlapping and dovetailing with each other because we're all just trying to get through this thing called life.
It's all of us messed up parents. None of us know what we're doing.
A lot of parenting questions.
Yeah. Well, this last one isn't. Let's finish on a fun one. So that's a good segue. Good job. This is from Stephanie. Hey boys, love the show, especially your music episodes. Me too. I was curious if either of you saw Taylor Swift on the Kelce Brothers podcast. I thought it was so wonderful and was curious of your thoughts. Are you guys Swifties? I'll lay it to you straight. Are you a Swiftie?
I would not say that I'm a Swiftie in terms of the level of obsession that I see the people that I know that are. You
probably
Swifties.
Have to reach a certain criteria to be called a Swiftie, as opposed to I like Taylor Swift.
Yeah, I would say that as a consumer of pop music and pop culture, I am intrigued and fascinated by Taylor Swift and the phenomenon of Taylor Swift. I am more and more impressed by her, both as a talent, as a songwriter and a performer, and just a creative person.
Yeah.
But also just as a businesswoman and the choices that she makes and the way it takes a very uniquely ambitious, driven, and well put together, well organized person, a leader, to be able to enact the career that she has been able to and to continue to grow. I mean, she's literally one of, if not the biggest artists of all time at this point. And so, what that looks like behind the scenes, I don't know. I did actually happen to listen to the podcast of her announcing her new album because a friend of mine recommended, and I was like, well, am I going to listen to 2 hours of the Kelce? I mean, I'm not a huge football guy. I'm like everyone else was curious to see, who's Taylor with now when I heard that she had a new boyfriend, and then the whole just phenomenon of the NFL and her, it was like,
and having to be in the Super Bowl 2 years in a row,
And I, along with everyone else, I mean, this isn't a therapist speaking, this is just a consumer of pop culture and a music guy and a fan of music and pop culture. I had my opinions right off the bat of what their relationship looked like everyone else compared to what I'd seen previous relationships. And so I was kind of curious to listen to the podcast and just hear like the dynamic between the two of them. Cause I know they're like the biggest couple in the world now. And it probably, I don't know the stats, but I have to imagine that had to be one of the most downloaded episodes of any podcast.
Until this episode. This one's going to break those records, but yeah.
But so when my friend recommended it, at first I was like, I don't know, maybe that's not really the type of thing I would listen to. But then I was like, yeah, it might be interesting. Also because the tagline on it was about music. I mean, it was spoiled for me. I knew she was announcing her new album and I knew that was a big thing.
Oh, so I didn't know anything about it.
Oh, no?
No.
Yeah. So, but also, she was talking a lot about the music industry and about buying her music back, the rights to her recordings, the master recordings. And she already owned all her publishing and stuff. A lot of that part of it was interesting, but stuff I already knew that I've known since I was a teenager because I was in the music industry young, and I was lucky enough to have a father who's an entertainment attorney and grew up in LA and had people that were giving us advice and explaining how these things work, how publishing works, how record deals work.
But a lot of people don't know.
A lot of people don't. And so understanding somebody that came from, I think she came from a small town in Pennsylvania. She didn't grow up in LA, New York, Nashville. So for her to be as savvy as she is, that was hard earned. And for her to be educating people on that now, after everything that she's gone through to empower herself. I don't know the nature of her actual first record deal. It sounded, she talked about it as if it were exploitive.
Yeah.
But all record deals are exploitive.
Isn't everybody's, especially their first, but
yeah. And I think that what she fought for in terms of owning her own masters is very rare. I mean, you have to be extremely powerful or rich.
Didn't she, not only that, but didn't she also just re-record everything that was previously owned and sell a new version of it that her fans were like, yep, please give me more?
I mean,
that's astounding.
To be able to fund that and promote it and have that loyal a fan base, it's amazing. I mean, it really is. Who else in history could have done that? I mean, again, it's the intersection of talent, of having fostered this following, and then having this incredible work ethic and business savvy to pull that off. And then after that, to attain the original masters, it's all very impressive. And I would say though, watching the dynamic though between the two of them, I'm not watching, I was listening to it while I was doing other stuff. I don't know why I keep saying watching.
But you can watch this podcast on YouTube.
Yeah. But I didn't. I listened to it. It was really just fascinating. And this is where the therapist in me does come in. The dynamic between the two of them, because you always wonder, and you don't often get a real glimpse behind the curtain of what celebrities' lives are really like and what their relationships are like. And you hear, oh, now Taylor's dating John Mayer, or a long list of impressive leading men and people that I'm sure a lot of women were jealous that she gets to date. But you kind of have a sense as to why those relationships don't work out. Just like every other Hollywood relationship, you take two people who are both probably big ego people, to become a leading man in Hollywood, to become a pop star. You're used to the attention being on you. You have to have a lot of drive and a lot of focus on your craft and your art, especially, and also like two creative people there's a lot of overlap in terms of what their process is and the way in which they tend to control their element. The closer you are together in terms of your energy and your force in that regard, the more there's probably attraction. And I imagine that I don't know Taylor, but just listening to her talk, I imagine that she must have, for all these other relationships, been so attracted to people that were like her in that way. But that's also the reason why a lot of relationships don't work out, is you're too alike.
Right.
And especially when you have two big sort of alpha personalities that are very driven, and without even being necessarily egocentric or narcissistic, but just being very focused on your own career and
There's only so much oxygen in the room. And if you're a bright star that's burning it all up, there's not enough to go around.
I've felt that in some of my relationships. Like it's hard for two people that take up a lot of space to coexist. There's a reason why you have opposites attract, and you have dynamics where one person fills a certain role in the relationship, another person fulfill, and there's overlap, but there's enough separation between those things that it's complementary rather than conflicting. And what was so fascinating about listening to this episode and listening to the two of them, because it was 2 hours mostly of her talking. She was the guest, and so I don't want to project too much onto it in terms of what the nature of their relationship is. But she clearly does take up a lot of space. She's very intelligent, she's very knowledgeable, and she's articulate and has a vision in terms of her career, in terms of her life. Even just in personal things, you can see, like, she's talking about making sourdough bread, and she's got like very specific vision of how you go about making sourdough bread. And you could just see he is so comfortable. Just probably a really secure person, but also just a very different kind of person. He is very comfortable playing second fiddle to her. And he's a huge star in his own right. Obviously has his own drive and his own career in a very different realm. There are ways in which there's overlap in terms of the kind of work ethic and stuff that's required to be an athlete and to be an artist. But he's, even in his position as a receiver, he's second fiddle to the quarterback, really, right?
That's a good point.
And he seems to me, just from listening to him talk, like he's a funny guy, he's a fun guy. He's not like an intellectual by nature, so there's not like that overlap. He's not, I mean, I don't know well enough to make these judgments.
You heard it here first. Ryan Dusick says Travis Kelce's dumb.
No, but he's self-deprecating. He refers, the two of them, he and his brother refer to themselves in that way. Like, well, we're just jocks, you know.
Okay.
And they're and she like the one will tease the other and be like, oh, that's a big word. Did you understand that word? She just used the word esoteric. Okay. He's like, I know that word. So it's like a gag that they have. But I think it's another example of how, like, they're not stepping on each other's toes. And I found that both charming and just sort of interesting and revealing in understanding relationships, where you could be attracted to somebody that's very similar to you or has the same expertise or the same sort of interests and proclivities, and it could not work because you're competing with each other.
Right.
But they seem very complementary because there's just enough separation.
That's what I was going to say. Like even I mean, the Super Bowls were sort of the apex of that fervor, and so every time Travis Kelce would catch a ball in the Super Bowl, they cut to Taylor, and I think that's overkill. But I also think the separation of those two worlds is enough that like even though she was there, she wasn't, I don't believe, trying to steal the spotlight. She understood that was Travis's time to shine. And when Taylor is on stage and Travis comes on and waves, that's her time to shine. Yeah. And they seem to have a good, I know, again, I didn't listen to the podcast, so I don't know. And I'm not, in answer to my own question, I also am not a Swiftie. I like her fine, but I don't know enough of her music to classify myself that way. But I've seen so much of them in pop culture as well that, it does feel like a good balance, and it feels healthy, and it feels like they give each other enough oxygen to shine in their own individual ways.
Well, there's not a lot of guys, and some of this is cultural conditioning in terms of the man's role in a relationship, and some of it is just ego. But there aren't a lot of guys that would be comfortable with a woman in a relationship that takes up that much space and gets that much of the attention. He's a guy who probably was, the star of his high school, the star of his college. He gets a lot of attention and stuff. And now he's got somebody in his life who gets much more attention than he does. And even when they're together, she is the primary focus. And I think that for a lot of men, that would be like, especially because she's a billionaire. I'm sure he's plenty rich, but she's always going to be
There's richer. Literally no man on the planet who could match up to her.
Exactly. And so it's impressive. You have to be a really secure guy to be okay with that. And I think you'd run the risk in a lot of cases of disappearing. There'd be too much of an imbalance where, like, okay, whereas it can happen in the opposite a lot, where you have a powerful man and the woman ends up being sort of disappearing. And
headlines say things like Travis Kelce's girlfriend. You're like, she has a name,
right? Exactly.
You know what I mean?
I think for someone like Taylor, you could see why it wouldn't work to be in a relationship with somebody who is an equal sort of. Or trying to compete with that. But then to find somebody who is okay with that, you might oftentimes err on the side of somebody who is just disappearing and doesn't have their own identity. So for him to have a strong identity of who he is, but still just really comfortable with the fact that, like, I think she's great. I'm Team Taylor. Yeah. I'm a fan as much as anything. He just keeps saying how big a fan he is of it. And it seems so genuine. He just seems like a genuine guy. And so she gets to live, she gets to shine. And he seems comfortable. So, I mean, I'm here. You heard it first. I think this one's going to work.
I think you are a Swiftie. I mean,
I love psychology. I love figuring out what makes people tick. And again, this isn't a therapist analyzing their relationship, but just the same reason why you tune in and you watch a show and you see, like, I wonder if this one's going to work, the romantic comedy I get it why there's so much obsession around this couple, because watching them together, they kind of fit together in a way that I imagine Swifties haven't seen in previous relationships.
I wonder how much time they do get to spend together. Just with her schedule. And I mean, you were saying that, didn't she record an album while she was touring?
Well, that was the amazing thing. I mean, just to show you, like, her work ethic, she put out an album in the middle of that whole Eras tour, which was almost, I think, kind of like a departure in terms it was a little bit more lyrical, it's a little more folksy, and people were surprised by that she put out a record in the midst of doing her biggest tour ever. But then now she's announcing this album that she made while she was in the middle of that tour. She was performing in Spain and then flying to Sweden to make a track with Max Martin and the Swedish techno mafia. And so she was, like, literally traveling all over the world, playing these stadiums. These are not little one-off gigs.
Right, yeah.
These are like, you come into town and you build a city, with big rigs and jets and everything. And it's 100,000 plus people, and the sound system and the enormous visual show, and then getting on a jet and flying and recording new music in the middle of that. So either she is an incredibly impressive creative person, which obviously she is, or she's a little nuts, or both.
Probably
which
a
is
little both.
the combination. And a lot of people, I'm sure that would be difficult because it's like, I'm a creative person, and I remember when I was writing my book and living with my ex-partner, at times I remember feeling bad. It's like when you're a creative person and you're in your element, you get kind of tunnel vision. Like you get very focused on what you're doing, and it can be really hard to pick your head up. And even when you do, and you're sitting at dinner, the only thing you could talk about is the thing you're working on, or your mind is there. And I think that's common for creative people. And that can be difficult for the partners of creative people. And I think that to be with somebody like that on day one, you kind of have to be on their team. You have to be a fan of what they do. And then it takes a little extra effort on both people's parts. It sounded like he traveled a lot to be with her. Whenever possible, he would go out, and it can't be too hard to motivate. Like, I'm guessing their lifestyle
pretty good.
But also they described what sounded like some pretty down home living. It's just like being at home with the cats, and so when that happens, I don't know how it all fits together. I don't know, but he seems like he gives the impression of being kind of an everyman, like a down to earth, down home kind of. He's from the Midwest, I think, and so that's probably also. I'm sure she was attracted to the Hollywood star and the New York celebrity, but coming from the country world and stuff, I'm sure that it does feel a little bit like coming home in some ways. I don't know what her home life was like growing up, but to have an anchoring force of a guy who's not off in the clouds and seems like an all-American bro.
Well, so there's the answer to your question. Ryan obviously has thoughts on the Taylor Swift Travis Kelce interview.
I had that in my back pocket.
Yeah, really. That was well timed. But I think this is great. I love having questions from our listeners. So please, if you heard this episode and you want to have a question answered, drop us a line at heartedtobreathepodcast@gmail.com. Some of these questions came from Instagram, so you can find us on Instagram. You can find us on YouTube, watch the shows, TikTok. We're everywhere. So really, like I said, drop us a line. Reach out. We'd love to hear from you. If you haven't already, please like and subscribe to the show. It helps us get a sense of how many people are listening, and we can tailor our content. You see what I did there? We can tailor our content to more of the things that you guys want to hear. So, if you want to hear more music episodes, we can get some more of people from Ryan's past. If you want to hear more actors from Ithaca College, we can get people from my past. So let us know what you want to hear. We'd love to hear from you.
You made swift work of that. Good job.
Golly. It just never
jokes.
stops. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you for tuning in for another one-on-one episode of the Harder to Breathe podcast. Join us every Tuesday when we release brand new episodes of the show. We'll see you next time right here on the Harder to Breathe podcast.